Today we're talking about two different approaches to creating the saveFileDialog component. And a component is essentially the same as a control, except it's not visible, or it's not visible all the time. In the case of the saveFileDialog, it's a dialog that pops up when certain user conditions exist, like he wants to select a place to save a file. And a saveFileDialog component can be created either via the IDE or via code, which is true of almost all controls and components like buttons and list boxes and text boxes and so on. When you drag it over to the IDE, when you create it in IDE mode, it doesn't go on the form because it's not visible. It goes to a place under the form called the component tray. And in almost every way it's identical to the open file dialog that I discussed in a previous tutorial. And probably the best way to find previous tutorials like that is to go to my website. Let's create the project by clicking on New Project. And Windows Form application is already selected. So let's call this saveFileDialog, say 01, so we don't get any reserved words or anything. And click OK. And then when the form comes up, let's just have a single button to initiate things. I'll drag this over. And to take the IDE approach of creating a save dialog, we need to go down to the dialogs, find a save dialog, and drag it over to the form. And you notice it doesn't actually go on the form, it goes into the gray area at the bottom of the screen, referred to as the component tray. Let's rename this SFD for Hungarian notation for saveFileDialog, and say IDE approach. Within the properties for the saveFileDialog component, we can create a filter, which is basically a type of file and then a bar, and then what defines that type of file, like *.txt for text files. And we could have several bars and several different types of these types. You know, we can have JPEGs or PNGs or whatever we want to do as a type of file. And we can also fill in the file name, which is the default file name we want to give it. In this case I'm saying IDE_guy. And then if we go into the event handler for the button, all I have to do is say the name of the component that we created in the component tray, and then show dialog. And if we compile, save and compile and run this and press this, you notice the save as type has only one type, text, because we only put one in the filter, and it already has a default name of IDE guy. So all we really need to do at this point is select a possible directory. Well, say go to .NET test and maybe create a new directory. Right click and say new, and call it test data. And where am I? Double click on test data and then click save, and basically nothing happened because we're not actually writing anything to that file. So if we go back to the form and go back to the dialog box, save file dialog box we created, we'll notice that the events for this are only two: file OK and help request. Most controls have a lot of different events they can trap, but this one only has two, and the default one is file OK. So if we double click on this component, we create an event handler called SFD IDE approach _ file OK with the usual object that defines who the sender is, and a data structure of information that could get passed to the event handler called cancel event args, that as usual is called E. So if we create a string here, call it name, and set it equal to SFD approach dot file name, and then this will actually be the fully qualified file name, not just the file name we specified in the properties, and then do a file. Oops. Oh, file's not defined. We need to go up here to using system.io, and now when we type in file, get a number of possible methods and properties, and actually practically all methods. Say write all text, and say write just the word test. Oh, and we also need to specify the name of where to write it. Alright, now if we compile and run this and press the save file dialog, and you see we're already in the directory we previously specified, since it remembers where we were before. And if we press save and go into Explorer, we see we created the file name that we specified in the file name, and with the type we specified in the filter. If I double click on this, you see it has indeed put in the word test. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned a lot, and don't forget to subscribe.